Once again, I'm getting behind on these. My excuse this time is that I beat Luigi's Mansion 2 shortly before Echoes of Wisdom released. I beat Echoes of Wisdom shortly before Mario Party released, and that oddly ended up taking up more single player time than I expected. But yeah, I don't think I have a lot to say about Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. Not subtitled Dark Moon, oddly enough. That's something I noticed, is that the Mario RPG of, the SNES era is called Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. The Switch version is just called Super Mario RPG. Luigi's Mansion 2 on the 3DS is called Luigi's Mansion 2 Dark Moon. This one is just Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. No Dark Moon subtitle. I don't know why. No need to go too deep on the mechanics of this game. This is a, typical Luigi's Mansion game. You have a Ghostbuster pack, basically, and as Luigi, you gotta go and hunt for ghosts, clear out these mansions. The big twist with this one is that there are multiple mansions instead of one big one, and it has a mission structure, which I know is a point of ire for a lot of people. It started out kind of annoying me. It is annoying to kind of be dragged away from the mansion, like partway through exploring it. But eventually, I kind of just came to accept this whole mission structure, because, different missions will actually change aspects of the mansion. And in order to, integrate that into just a continuous experience of exploring one specific mansion, they would have to completely restructure this whole game. And I'm not really asking for that out of this port. My only point of contention by the end of the game with the mission structure is that sometimes missions will end before I was ready for them to. It's not always clear whether the current objective is just one objective of the mission or the final objective. And so sometimes I would actually want to have more time to explore within the specific mission I was in, but I would be dragged away before I was ready. And I do think this experience gets better as it goes on. Initially, I thought that the first boss was going to be the only good one. I was very disappointed by the rest of the bosses for a while, but then I got near the end of the game, and I gotta say, some of those final segments and the final few bosses are actually really well done. I am a big fan of the final mansion in this game, and I do like pretty much every mansion itself. It's just, the bosses at the end of the mansions, it's bookended by the best ones. Honestly, my biggest issues with this game aren't with necessarily the game itself, but this specific version of the game. Or really the fact that this specific version of the game is $60. If this was a $40 port, same price as the original, I would be a lot more forgiving. But this is $20 more than the 3DS game. And it really does not, the amount of effort put into this port does not reflect a $20 price increase. I'm honestly not sure if there were any quality of life improvements. I might be wrong on saying that. Maybe there were some pretty big things here, but I think it really is mostly just an HD update. There are times when animations will just freeze. A character will be talking or something, and their entire model will just stop in place, just stop animating, and it's very uncanny. Or even you'll walk through a room, and for a split second, the models in that room will just be frozen there. And that's not a game-ruining thing or anything, but it's just, when you're gonna charge another $20 to port this game to Switch, I would expect stuff like that to be cleaned up. If this is an HD game, it should have HD animation. Another thing is the Scare Scraper. I know the Scare Scraper is a pretty big part of the Luigi's Mansion 2 experience, and the thing is, you can play it in single player. I'm not locked out of doing the Scare Scraper, but it's really meant to be a multiplayer thing. And with the 3DS release, you had download play. Not everyone had to have a copy of the game to play it. I never owned the 3DS Luigi's Mansion 2, but I did get to play Scare Scraper with my friends a bit because of that feature. Because the Switch doesn't have download play, that's not an option here. You can play online with other people who have the game, but that would require me to find 3 friends who I can convince to buy this $60 port of a $40 game. With Clubhouse Games, Nintendo allowed players to download a demo so that if one person had a full price copy of the game, the demo could connect to that copy and then access games that are not included in the demo, essentially creating a download play-like experience for Clubhouse Games. I feel like that should be an option here, but there's just no option. There's seemingly no demo for Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, period, as far as I can tell. So yeah, if you want to play Scarescaper with a team of people, you have to convince them to buy this game, and that's just a very hard sell. I'm not gonna try to do that. Now, I debated where to put this because of the fact that, honestly, when it comes to being a game, I feel like I do enjoy this more than Princess Peach Showtime. Not to put down Princess Peach Showtime, I feel like this has a lot more going for it, as a video game and as an adventure, whereas Princess Peach Showtime is more like a playable theater experience. So I want to rank this above, but Princess Peach Showtime is a ground-up video game. They created that without, any past resources to build, without a past game to build off of. Taking a $40 video game, updating the models, and then selling it for $60 is not something I feel should be celebrated as being worth more than a made for the ground up video game. So I think I'm going to put this behind Princess Peach Showtime, actually. I would say, even though I haven't played the 3DS game, I'm pretty sure I could rank the 3DS game above Princess Peach Showtime if I were ranking that instead of this version. The 3DS version still wouldn't quite beat Side Order for me. I just really enjoyed that. It's such a well-made roguelike experience, and obviously I love Splatoon, and just getting to see Off the Hook again is great. So yeah, I would still put any version of Luigi's Mansion 2 behind Side Order, but this version specifically, I'm also going to put behind Princess Peach Showtime. Before discussing the new Zelda game, I want to discuss how I felt about Tears of the Kingdom. I will try to get my actual full review up, like sometime before my 40s, but to very briefly summarize my thoughts, I did have an overall positive opinion of the game. However, like many Zelda fans, I was extremely disappointed at how many series staples it still lacked. Now, obviously, if you've seen my reactions, you know I was very excited for Echoes of Wisdom, but there was a little nagging thought in the back of my mind that was just a bit worried it might be a bit too much like Tears of the Kingdom, that we still wouldn't have classic dungeons, anything like classic items, that when you walked into a dungeon, there would still be 5 things you have to activate, and you can activate them in any order. But thankfully, those fears were unfounded. The main gimmick of Echoes of Wisdom, as you are probably already aware, are the echoes, the ability to copy various objects and even enemies from the overworld, and then paste them wherever you want. Alongside this, you have Bind, an ability which allows you to move objects with yourself, or vice versa to move yourself according to an object's movement. One of the big complaints of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the story that you, the player, get to experience. The entire story of those games is pretty much set in the past, and everything you do in the present is very, very simple. Because of the fact those games are open world, the story can't really progress at an even pace, or at least not the way those games are designed. In Echoes of Wisdom, after you beat the intro of the game, essentially the first dungeon, you can explore the entire map, so you would think it would have the same problem. But instead, it takes the obvious solution to this issue. You can explore the entire map, but you can't access every dungeon. there is still a select number of dungeons you have to complete before the story will progress for you to access more. This pretty easily fixes a lot of the gameplay and story issues with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In terms of the story, I don't want to say much, but all I'm going to say is I was extremely pleasantly surprised. I was expecting a very simple, by-the-books Zelda adventure, just with Zelda and Link's roles swapped, but what I got was far more interesting. And from a gameplay perspective, I think one thing disappointing about the other Switch titles is the sense of progression. Yes, you get more hearts, yes, you can find stronger weapons temporarily, but you don't get new major items that you get to use throughout the adventure like you did in classic Zeldas. In the 3D Switch titles, everything you get, all of your major abilities, are at the very beginning of the game. After that, you don't really get anything new that's permanent. You can up your health, you can up your stamina, but there are no new exciting abilities for you to gain. On the other hand, Echoes of Wisdom has multiple progression systems, all of which are incredibly intelligently designed. There are smaller ones. For example, in the first dungeon, Zelda gains the ability to use a sword fighter form, and you can find might crystals to both increase the time that you can have the sword fighter form active, as well as the power of the sword fighter form. But the main progression system is Tri, Zelda's companion, and the reason she can use Echoes. Tri has a certain number of triangles, starting with 3, which you need to spawn Echoes. So some Echoes may only cost 1 triangle, such as the bed, whereas others may cost 2, 3, or even more. The first and more obvious way Tri grows more powerful is just in being able to summon more Echoes, getting more triangles, or getting the ability to summon older Echoes with less triangles used. But Echoes themselves are also a form of progression. You might think that because you get the Echo ability and the Bind ability at the beginning of the game, it's just like the other Switch original titles, where you get all your abilities and that's it. But the difference between the Echo ability and Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild's abilities is that the Echo ability can build on top of itself, because the Echo ability is based on getting new Echoes. This, paired with the fact the dungeon order is once again more restrictive, means the designers actually can control which Echoes you have in which dungeon. Rather than giving you every OP ability at the start of the game, they can selectively control when they give you what. In other words, Echoes replace the classic Zelda dungeon items. In the 3D Zelda Switch games, you can go straight to the final boss, and before the final boss you face a gauntlet of all the other bosses. This means that the other bosses need to be beatable without requiring any specific abilities. In Echoes of Wisdom, they can once again force you to have specific Echoes to beat a boss. If it isn't obvious already, Echoes of Wisdom's dungeons are so much better designed than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's. The 3D Switch games just plop you in a dungeon and say activate 5 switches to gain access to the boss room. And you can do those switches in whatever order you want. Echoes of Wisdom brings back classic dungeon design. There is one dungeon that kind of follows the 3D game formula, the 3D Switch game formula, but even that dungeon is still more restrictive, and you still need to find a boss key in order to get to the boss. So Echoes of Wisdom's bosses can require specific solutions. They can mandate that you have specific Echoes. While I don't believe any of the bosses require just one specific Echo and only that one Echo can defeat the boss, they do often have requirements such as a specific element. So, for example, a boss might specifically require you to have an Ice Elemental Echo. And because of that, the boss design is a lot more interesting while still being open. Which echoes you use, which specific ice echoes you use, is still entirely up to you. You can still come at the boss with multiple different strategies, but it is a lot more interesting to fight than anything in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. This game does what I had hoped Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom would do. The puzzle philosophy is very similar to those games. It is a much more open-ended approach, with you being able to use many different echoes or combinations of echoes to accomplish what you want. But it also has the structure of a classic Zelda game, including inside the dungeons. The dungeons themselves do have these sort of more open-ended puzzles, but just having the same structure as what we used to have does wonders for their design. And this philosophy bleeds into the still worlds, which add like a totally new type of puzzle to Zelda, because now we have platforming puzzles, something we've basically never had before. Yes, there's been a jump button in the past, but now we have a dedicated jump button from the start, and combined with echoes, just getting over gaps becomes a challenge. Still World is essentially a top-down platforming section, which is just very interesting. I suppose I mentioned bosses, but I haven't really gone in detail on combat yet, because while you do have the sword fighter form, which allows you to basically just play like Link would at any point in, a classic Zelda game and just directly attack the enemies, most of the time you're going to be using echoes, just summoning different monsters, or even sometimes summoning things to throw at monsters in order to beat them. And of course, the worry here is, will the monsters cooperate? I follow Arlo, and in his video he mentioned that he had an issue with this, where he often found that echoes wouldn't quite cooperate with what he was wanting them to do. And to that I would say, I think that's actually kind of the point. I don't think that's a flaw with the game. In fact, I think it's a strength. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but in reality, I think it's part of the game's balance. Because the game has stronger and weaker echoes, having them be more or less effective at certain tasks is how the game keeps things balanced and keeps things interesting in how you approach a situation. For example, there are different levels of some enemies. So a Lizalfos, for example, has level 1, level 2, and level 3, which get stronger and cost more to spawn as they get up in level. You might think that a level 3 Lizalfos is the best in all situations, and for the most part it is the strongest option there. However, the difference is it is a bit slower than the level 2 Lizalfos in starting to attack. In other words, a level 2 Lizalfos is often going to attack immediately when you spawn it, whereas a level 3 Lizalfos, it is often going to try and position itself immediately after you spawn it and then attack. So the question is, do you want to spend more for a stronger monster, but that takes a longer time to attack, or do you just want to position yourself in front of the enemy and immediately spawn the monster that's going to attack your enemy head on? Wizrobes are another example of this. When you first spawn a Wizrobe, it is very likely to miss its initial attack. It may often have to warp somewhere and reposition itself to attack. But the advantage of them is that they can attack multiple times, and they have a decent enough amount of health that they can even take some hits. Whereas something like a Keese, it's going to die almost immediately after you spawn it. So the question is, do you want to spawn a Wizrobe for maybe a slower singular enemy, or a group of slower enemies, or do you want to spawn a bunch of smaller, more cost-effective enemies to take care of a group? That's part of the strategy of this game and what keeps it so interesting. I actually think it's kind of like Pokemon's accuracy gimmick. Do you want to use a more effective echo that has lower accuracy, or do you want to use an echo with almost 100% accuracy, but that might not be quite as strong? The one thing where I will somewhat agree on the whole uncooperative monsters issue is with the targeting system. This is the first top-down Zelda with a targeting system, and it's very easy to see the challenges with implementing it in a top-down Zelda as opposed to a 3D Zelda. In a 3D Zelda, you are aiming the camera wherever you want it to look. So when you press the targeting system, yes, it may target the wrong thing, but at the very least, you know that you have the camera aimed at the objects you might want to target. So if you let go and retarget, you are likely to lock onto what you had intended to in the first place. In a top-down game, everything around you is on screen at once. You can't simply aim the camera in the direction you want. Because the camera is now above you, showing literally everything within your vicinity, that means the targeting system can also lock onto anything within your vicinity. So it's a lot less accurate to what you want to lock onto compared to the 3D titles. My only real complaint with this game is one thing it actually shares with Tears of the Kingdom, which is your item management, or rather, in this game, your echo management. Like Tears of the Kingdom, you hold a button on the D-pad, and that brings up a long horizontal list of every single echo in the game, just one by one, that you have to scroll through. And you can sort by things like most used and last used or type to try and more easily find what you want to, but it still follows the formula of just having one long list of every single echo in the game. Thankfully, you can press the plus button to open the notebook and choose from a grid rather than a line. And in fact, I was probably using this just as often, if not maybe even more than simply holding the D-pad near the end of the game. But this harkens back to the issue with the old 2D Zelda games, where you could only assign so many items at a time. In the Game Boy ones, only 2 at a time, including your sword, so you would often have to open your menu to switch items. Thankfully, Echoes of Wisdom isn't quite as bad as those games, because your main abilities are still locked to different buttons. You know, you can still jump at all times, you can still use bind at all times. You don't have to assign those to different items, but because you can only have one echo at a time, you will often have to use the pause menu. While the menu itself could use some improvements, I will say there is one quality of life feature I am very happy about, which is that while you have the D-pad menu open or the pause menu open, it will also pause any timers, such as in the Sleep Dojo, where you have little combat challenges, and I am very thankful for that. If the timer kept running while that menu was open, it would be extremely tedious. So it seems they clearly knew to design around that, and I am thankful for that. My friend and I were discussing a few different ways they could have solved this. Of course, one of the simplest is to redesign the UI itself in the menu to, maybe have somewhat more of a grid-based format rather than just a single long line. My thought was also just if you could assign echoes to multiple different buttons, like both the D-pad and the L button just open that menu. If you could have actually assigned an echo to the L button, that might have been useful. Or even the A button when you're not in a town or something, maybe. Like, have the A button deactivate and be for talking to people when you get near them, but then have it spawn echoes otherwise. But yeah, other than that one issue of having to open the menu a lot, especially near the end of the game to switch echoes, this is a very well-designed Zelda game. And from what I've seen, just about anybody who's actually played the game has had extremely positive things to say about it. I feel like this disproves the idea that Zelda fans just want the exact same thing over and over, because this is a very different experience from a typical classic Zelda. This is not necessarily a classic Zelda game. You have a completely different moveset. You don't have access to your sword at most times. And yet, most who've played the game still love it because it still has the formula of a classic Zelda. That's really what we were missing. We don't mind an open world format, and we don't mind interesting new gameplay mechanics like in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. We just want to have the classic formula back. We just want that sense of progression that the 3D Switch titles lacked. If you haven't guessed already, Echoes of Wisdom is going to dethrone the Thousand Year Door for my game of the year so far, and I think it may very well stay that way. I'm very much looking forward to Mario and Luigi Brothership, but, can it be Zelda? Well, we'll have to see. It may not be a grand 3D adventure, but even so, I would say Echoes of Wisdom is what I wanted Tears of the Kingdom to be. It is a perfect marriage of the classic Zelda formula with the modern open world twist. I think for all of us classic Zelda fans, this is exactly the title that we were hoping for. This is exactly the title we needed in this moment of fretting about the series' future. If the next 3D Zelda game essentially takes this game's formula and just makes it into a 3D title, that will be exactly what I want to see for the future of the series. Now that it's 2025, let's record my thoughts on Mario and Luigi Brothership. The basic combat of Brothership is much like other Mario and Luigi games. You press A for Mario and B for Luigi, and you have action prompts. It's very similar to Paper Mario, except now instead of a partner system, you always have Luigi. If you look into the reception of this game, I'm sure you've seen it's been quite mixed. Some have given it 5 out of 10, called it mid. That's been very common, but others have given it 8s or 9s. It said it's one of the best in the series. And I can see why it has quite a mixed reception. There is a lot in this game that annoys me, but the thing is, I think this game's biggest issue is its pacing, because I think if you stick with it, there is a fantastic game here. There's a lot in this game that I thought would be, tedious early on, but later on turned out not to be a big deal. Like the sailing system, you have different quadrants and currents you can select, and the ship will automatically start to head in that direction. And near the beginning of the game, it is slightly tedious, having to wait, but then you gain a fast sail system very early on. And you only really have to deal with this system when dealing with tiny islands, ones with very mini challenges, or the great lighthouses. So there were a couple of times where this system became tedious in having to travel back to great lighthouses for boss refights, or harder boss refights, I should say. But that's about it. Otherwise, every other island in the game is connected to your ship. Your main goal throughout the game is connecting islands to Ship-Shape Island, the central hub world, and you do this by finding each main island's lighthouse. Once you do that, the island is connected to the ship via a fast travel pipe, meaning you can just use that pipe to go back at any time. You don't have to worry about sailing back to the initial island. This game has a ton of side content on said islands, and a few more on the mini little islets you'll find. So basically, if you need to go back to an islet, there will almost always be a side quest on one of the main islands you can go to. So you can start sailing towards the islet you need, and then go and do that side quest on the main islands using the pipe while that's happening. The game does encourage you to go back to every island. After you plug in the lighthouse, I forget what they're called, but I think there's sprite bulbs will appear all over the island, and you'll often, of course, have side quests popping up throughout the adventure on your past islands. So pretty much every island in the game you are going to go back to at least once after you beat it the first time, if you care about doing side content. And I pretty much 100%ed this game. Except for the ball game, we don't talk about that. Of course, the main draw of this game is its combat system. And that is both where I think the pacing issues come into play most prevalently, but also where I think the game really hits its stride if you do stick with it. What I mean by pacing issues with combat is it just takes a while for the combat system to really get fleshed out. It takes a long time for you to even get your hammers in the beginning, which means you're basically just using one attack for a while. Then you're limited to just the jump and hammer attacks, just those two attacks for a while. And then it takes a while for you to get your first bros moves, which means you're only able to attack one enemy at a time for quite a while. And even after that, I think it's after the first huge boss fight of the game that you get battle plugs, which are the game's main gimmick, the battle system's main gimmick. I didn't even know battle plugs were in the game, but they are a huge part of the combat, and it's really once you get to those that the combat opens up and shows its true potential. Battle plugs are pretty simple. You just have 3+ at a time that you can plug in, and plugging in different battle plugs gives you different effects. So for example, you have iron balls iron spike balls that you can drop on enemies after you hit them, or kaboom attack, which allows you to hit multiple enemies with a shockwave after attacking just one of them with your basic jump or hammer attack. Or you have things like auto mushroom, which will automatically use a mushroom if you're low on health without actually using your turn. So you can use a mushroom and still attack the enemy instead of having to waste your turn on using mushroom or other items. And these plugs build on top of each other. So for example, if you use kaboom attack with the iron spike ball battle plugs, if you use both of those together, then after you hit an enemy with jump or hammer attack, every enemy affected by the shockwave is also going to be affected by the spike balls. And those are just some of the earliest examples I listed. You get a whole bunch of fun abilities throughout the game. And of course, there's also, side quests and everything that will expand your roster of battle plugs. The other cool thing about battle plugs is this sounds like something you would just equip outside a battle and then you just have it per battle, right? No, the battle plugs will go down, their uses available to you will go down after pretty much every single turn of the battle or every time that they are used. The game is also pretty smart most of the time about only using a battle plug if it is actually used. For example, something like auto mushroom, it's not going to be used unless you're low on health, and it's not going to go down unless you actually do get the use of an auto mushroom. It's not going to use up its turns unless it is actually activated. So instead of setting the battle plugs outside of battle, you can do that just to be prepped, but they're actually going to go down during your battle, and you're going to be switching them out mid-battle, meaning you can actually choose to switch to a healing set, things like auto mushroom, and then things like item duplicate. I don't remember the name, but it'll actually duplicate an item that you use, so that if you use like a max mushroom, you get it back. Spirited item, which will give you potential status effects if you use an item, things like that. If you want to swap out all your battle plugs so that they all match with each other and complement each other, you can do that. You can change between like healing items and more battle damage oriented battle plugs in the middle of battle. You don't have to just limit yourself to one, or one set, per battle. You get to switch out as you are fighting the enemies. So in a boss fight, you're probably going to be switching multiple times. And of course, this does make battles longer if you choose to mess with the battle plug system. It makes it longer in how you activate them and how you set them up, but if you coordinate them correctly, it makes battles go by quicker. So it's kind of a give and take where, yes, the battles themselves can get longer if you spend too much time messing with the plugs, but because of the effects of the plugs, you're going to be whizzing through battles way faster once it becomes a mechanic. So yeah, the fact you have to wait so long to get to battle plugs, and even just to get to bros moves and hammer, even just your basic hammer, I understand why some people got soured on the battle system early on, but I really think the battle system just gets better as it goes on, and as you get even more battle plugs and even more bros moves, it just gets more and more ridiculously fun. I think the story also has some similar pacing issues, in that it starts out seeming a bit simpler than it is. I'm still not going to say that this is the most complex story ever. I would say the Thousand Year Door easily beats this story-wise, but I think the game story does get better as it goes on. It starts out kind of, you know, luring you into a bit of a false sensation where it gives away maybe a bit too much at the start so that you think you understand pretty much everything. But as it goes on, I think that things do start to pick up a bit. You start to see a bit more of what's going on, and there is a bit more than you realize initially, at least in my personal opinion. I would also have to say the draw of the story isn't how complex and how twisty it is. The draw of the story is just in how thematically consistent and well written it is. I feel like while it starts out seeming very simple and very safe, as the game goes on, you really start to see both what is explicitly stated and what is much more subtly implied, how the basic theme of connection just runs through pretty much every line of dialogue. The game also has some moments that are just really funny. There's one especially near the end that I don't know if it'll be as funny to everyone else as it is to me, but it's not quite the style of humor I expect out of a Mario and Luigi game. And it's like social awkwardness humor. And I just really like that the game has a joke like that at all. A lot of this game's humor, I think, is more subtle and just more interesting than the humor of past Mario RPGs. So I really think Mario and Luigi Brothership hasn't gotten quite the fair shake it deserves. A lot of people have written off the game before trying it themselves, or just from what they've heard, or just the first few hours of gameplay, which I understand with the latter at least. But I really think if you stick with Brothership, there is a fantastic game to be had here. That being said, for all of its negatives, how long it takes for the battle system to get fleshed out, also some things, some nitpicks I haven't quite gotten into, it does have to load every single battle. That is a bit annoying. And it also doesn't have like the Earthbound-esque system where you're able to defeat enemies on the overworld. Yes, you can attack enemies on the overworld and it'll initiate a first strike, but you still have to go through a whole loading screen and everything. Unlike, for example, Thousand Year Door has a badge where if you equip it, you just jump on the enemy and it kills them right there in the overworld. No loading screen or battle system required. That's just one thing. The game has a ton more tiny things that just waste time. It doesn't run the best on the overworld, especially near the end, and that is pretty annoying. But overall, I really think the positives completely outweigh the negatives in this particular game. I almost forgot to mention the soundtrack, but I gotta say I was very pleasantly surprised with the soundtrack of this game too. This is one where I feel it is more notable. With Echoes of Wisdom, I believe I said that the music didn't quite do very much for me in most cases. It was just kind of pleasant, but this game has several songs that are just drilled into my head now and are basically gonna be there forever. And that's not a bad thing. I think this soundtrack was very good overall. The one nitpick I'll say is the basic battle theme. I think it's a great theme. I think it's really fun the first 500 times you hear it, but the thing is, there is never any variation on it. Yes, you have boss battle themes that are different, but Other than that, anytime you are facing any basic encounter, right up through the final dungeon, it is the same theme. And as good of a theme as it is, I really think it could have used at least one more theme for basic enemy encounters, just as you go along. But yeah, other than that, I think the soundtrack is excellent. For a while in this game, I was going to put it right after Side Order. I still really enjoyed it, but I didn't necessarily feel like it quite hit whatever it is Splatoon does that just, drills its way into my soul. However, I'd say maybe around the third sea or so is when the game really picked up for me, story-wise and combat-wise. I just think the game really hit its mark around that area and just got better and better and better from there. And so I am going to end up putting this, I believe, right in front of Side Order. I do think this is a better game than, a DLC campaign, a shorter DLC campaign. There's just a lot more to this game. It's not quite Echoes of Wisdom, of course, which is my game of the year, but I am going to put it still behind Thousand Year Door. I do think Thousand Year Door is the better game. It just has the better story. The combat systems of both are, I don't know, maybe equal. It's really hard to give an edge to either combat system, but I do think Thousand Year Door is, it's just a smoother experience, I would say, whereas Brothership does have some nitpicks in that area. So yeah, for having the better story and probably an equivalent combat, I will give the Thousand Year Door the edge over Brothership. I would probably say, if I were to rank these 3 Mario RPGs we've gotten over the past year, it would probably go the Thousand Year Door, then Brothership, then Mario RPG. Brothership was going to take last place again pretty much up until like the third C of Brothership, but after that third C, it just really took off, and I think it pulled ahead of Mario RPG. Alright, Super Mario Party Jamboree. I played it before Brothership, but I wanted to give it more time, play more multiplayer matches with friends and family and everything, in order to get a solid understanding of the game. And at this point, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it. The single player element isn't that important, but I'll briefly go over it. There's a brief mode where you set up the party. You basically just go through and play all the mini games and do some like little fetch quests on each of the boards. Kind of lets you explore the boards outside of a game, which is nice, and lets you, of course, get used to the mini games and everything. My one complaint about this mode is that sometimes it can be a bit tedious. If you lose a game, it kicks you all the way back out. You have to go back through the dialogue and everything to play it again. Also, the boss fights in this one don't feel like boss fights at all. In fact, it's almost impossible to lose them. I think it maybe is impossible to lose them. I remember in Mario Party 9 there were boss fights you actually could lose, if I remember correctly, and for all the issues of that game, I think the boss fights were one thing that was kind of fun in the brief amount of time I played it. So yeah, boss fights are a disappointment here, but single player is not why you come to a Mario Party game. There are a lot of fun side modes and everything. I will briefly mention that some of the modes you can't play locally, and I don't have other friends that own this game, so I'd basically have to play online with randos or just play single player with comms, like for Bowser Kaboom Squad or Koopathlon, and that can be fun enough, but I do wish there were some kind of local version of those modes, because Bowser Kaboom Squad especially seems really fun to do with friends. Koopathlon does make more sense as an online only mode, but yeah, I think like a 4-player version of Kaboom Squad, or a version that has 4 players and 4 comms, could be fun to do locally. It's just a shame that you can't play that with people in person, because that's kind of the whole point of Mario Party in my opinion. As for the main modes themselves, the main Mario Party mode, it is fantastic. I think probably the best on the Switch. And as someone who unfortunately started with 9, aside from maybe some small games of other Mario Parties I played at friends' houses and stuff, the first one I owned was 9, so this is probably the best Mario Party I own. It went 9, then Superstars. I skipped over Super Mario Party. I skipped over 10. Then Jamboree, and I think Jamboree is probably the best one that I actually own and play regularly. The roster is great. I think every board, I don't think there's a board in this game that I dislike at all. All of them seem well designed. They're all, there's always something exciting. Even Wiggler's Tree Party is very basic, but it's still enjoyable. It's just nice for a very, tame experience if that's what you're looking for. However, I will say that I think 10 turns isn't enough to properly experience these boards, but 15 turns is just a bit too long in terms of real world time. Mostly I feel like it comes down to just the speed that everything moves, the dialogue, even though I have it set to its fastest, and the speed characters move along the board and everything. I think it all just could be sped up a bit more, but I think the biggest issue that makes games take so long are the Jamboree buddies, and specifically the Jamboree buddy mini games. Jamboree buddies are a really fun mechanic. I'm not knocking the idea itself of Jamboree buddies. The way they work is one of the other characters that nobody's playing as will drop on the board. So like if nobody's playing as Luigi, Luigi might drop on the board. And then once someone gets to them, you play a mini game to decide who gets them. And then once you have them, you can do things twice. So you can buy 2 items from a shop instead of 1. You can have a ghost steal a star and then some coins. Most importantly, you can buy 2 stars at once if you have enough coins for it. So that is the big draw of Jamboree buddies. But then also someone can steal them by just passing you when you have them. And again, the big issue is just that their minigames take so long. If you have the time for it, that's not the worst thing in the world, but sometimes they'll show up like within the second to last turn. Nobody who is able to get to them, or nobody is in a position where they can actually do anything useful with them within that time. And yet they show up, and if someone reaches them, which sometimes is impossible to avoid, you are all forced to play this ridiculously long game, sometimes for nothing. And so really, I just think speeding everything up and giving us more options would be the biggest benefit to this game, the biggest way to improve it. Just allowing us to, do a 15-turn game in the time that a 10-turn game currently takes. There are a lot of ways I think they could do this, especially with Jamboree buddies. They could allow you to set it so that whoever reaches a Jamboree buddy first gets them, or just make shorter Jamboree buddy minigames. Maybe let the players set how long they want the Jamboree buddy minigames to go for, instead of having them all take 5 minutes. Or even have an option within the game itself. When somebody reaches the Jamboree buddies, everybody gets to make a vote and say, do you want to play a minigame for them? Or do you want to just give it to the person that reached them? Or even ignore them entirely and pass them by? I think that could solve a lot of the issues in terms of how long every single game takes. But really, again, overall, I think the game itself needs to be sped up. Just the length of time everything takes could be sped up. And that would help maybe even more than the Jamboree buddy changes. I will also say, and maybe I'm weird for this, but I actually like the motion mini games in Mario Party. I think Mario Party is one of those games where everything is so, you know, luck-based and chaotic that motion kind of adds to the chaos of it. But if you want to have motion mini games in this game, you have to use a single Joy-Con. I feel like just about every motion mini game in this game could be played with a Pro Controller, and even then you could have an option to just turn off the ones that don't work with Pro Controllers. I don't know, I think it's annoying that if you want to play motion mini games, you have to use a single Joy-Con. You can't even use, you know, 2 Joy-Con per player. That would also mostly fix the issue. But no, you're limited to the, you know, the cramped tiny little Joy-Con controller, which is a bit annoying, for sure. Oftentimes, single-player games get an edge over multiplayer games just because, you know, it's a whole grand adventure. And I am still going to put Thousand Year Door and Echoes of Wisdom ahead of this one. But I think I'm going to put Jamboree actually above Brothership, just by a bit. In the middle of my list, it's always a bit close between games, I would say. Depending on the way I feel a day, maybe this could be behind Brothership, but right now, as of my making this list, I'm saying I think this does get an edge, just because of how much I like the base game of Mario Party and how well crafted the mode is. Again, my biggest issue with the timing is that I can't play as much of it as I would like. I like these boards so much that I often want to do multiple games of Mario Party at once. The issue is 10 turns isn't enough to properly experience the boards, and 15 turns often just takes too much turn in terms of real world time in order to be able to do 2 games within a setting where I have people over. So yeah, I wish I had more time. I wish I could give this game more of the time it deserves to properly experience it every time I turn it on. That being said, it's still, if I have, you know, 3 to 4 people over, it's almost guaranteed it's going to be turned on from now on, at least until the next Mario Party comes out. So with that, we have my full list, and my game of the year for 2024 is The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Who would have guessed it's a Zelda game? Yeah, I feel like every year I'm not able to play anywhere near the amount of games I want to play. I think the list this year is, 8 games, which sounds small, but, you know, I put plenty of hours into every single game, I would say. I don't think there's a game that I spent a small amount of time with. Probably the shortest is, I don't know, Princess Peach Showtime, maybe Animal Well. I think I put more time into Animal Well. Now, I have decided I'm going to continue this until the Switch 2 comes out, whenever that is. We're still waiting, as of my recording this, for an official announcement. We know it's going to be coming before March 31st, and is currently January 5th, so that's where we're at right now. And I'm since I've been ranking all the Switch games I played so far, I'm just gonna keep doing that until the Switch is no longer the current console. So I will be doing another ramble review for Xenoblade X. I don't know if there are any new games I'm going to play between then. I have some older games I'm going to play. I don't know if I'm going to bother doing, you know, whole videos for those, but I'll try to work them into some kind of a list somehow. But yeah, I want to continue this until the end of the Switch's lifespan, and then I'll feel comfortable stopping with these little ramble reviews. So in the off chance anyone actually watches this video, thank you for doing so. I'm glad you want to listen to some random person ramble about their Switch games for the year, especially when they play what feels like so few. But yeah, I don't think there's been a year with the Switch I haven't enjoyed. It has been a fantastic console, and perhaps it's a bit bittersweet to see it go. But at the same time, I'm really excited to find out what the next console has in store, because the Switch has been on such a roll. This was supposed to be essentially the last big year or full year for it, and it still felt pretty packed. Maybe not the biggest titles in the world, but still plenty of titles throughout the entire year. Too many for me to keep up with. So, well, we're just gonna have to see where it goes from here. Thank you for watching.